Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Deuteronomy chapter 11 in a clear and simple way, step by step. I am so thrilled you're joining me for this explainer because, well, what we have in front of us is just an incredibly rich, foundational text. Today we're going to systematically break down the simple, literal meaning of this chapter. You know, in the Hebrew study tradition, this straightforward reading is known as the Peshat. So we aren't going to get lost in deep symbolic interpretations or complex mysticism today. Instead, we're just going to look directly at the text itself. We want to understand who's speaking, what they're saying, where they're standing, and exactly what these ancient words mean for us right now.
Okay, let's dive into this. We are looking strictly at chapter 11 of Deuteronomy. And honestly, this chapter is an absolute masterpiece of ancient instruction. It contains some of the most powerful, final, and direct instructions given by Moses to the Israelites. We're going to go verse by verse, section by section, making sure we don't miss a single crucial detail. We'll clarify the locations, the historical events he references, and the really vivid metaphors he uses to get these life-altering commands across.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. Context and chapter hook. 2. Remembering past divine acts. 3. Egypt versus the Promised Land. 4. Obedience, rain, and harvest. 5. The blessing and the curse. And 6. Practical lessons and recap. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. Context and our chapter hook. Let's figure out exactly where we are in the story.
Before we even read the first verse of chapter 11, we absolutely have to understand the physical and historical ground we're standing on. You can't truly understand a speech if you don't know who's giving it and to whom, right? So imagine this. For the past 4 decades, the Israelites have been wandering in a harsh desert wilderness. The older generation, they lived through slavery in Egypt and witnessed astounding miracles of deliverance. Then came 40 long years of wandering and divine discipline in the desert. The weight of those 40 years is just heavy in the air. Now today, they are camped out on the plains, standing right at the edge of the Jordan River. They are preparing to finally cross over and take possession of the Promised Land. The speaker here is Moses. He's delivering his final addresses, and he is acutely aware that he will not be crossing that river with them. The emotional weight here is immense. This is his final plea, his ultimate instruction manual for their survival and success in a completely new environment.
Section 2. Remembering past divine acts. Let's look at how they recall God's power.
The very first command in verse 1 is straightforward. Love the Lord your God and keep his requirements, decrees, laws, and commands always. But you know, Moses knows that rules without memory just fade away. So in verses 2 through 6, he establishes this absolutely crucial theme of memory. He explicitly says he's talking to the adults, the ones who actually lived through this, not their kids who didn't see it. And he walks them through specific, undeniable historical events. First, he reminds them of the majestic signs and miracles performed right in the heart of Egypt against Pharaoh and his whole country. Then, he brings their minds back to what happened to the Egyptian army, their horses and chariots, and how the waters of the Red Sea completely overwhelmed them. But Moses doesn't just focus on the outward victories, right? He brings up internal discipline too. In verse 6, he mentions Dathan and Abiram. These guys rebelled against Moses' leadership. Moses vividly reminds the people of that terrifying moment when the earth literally opened its mouth right in the middle of the camp and swallowed them, their families, their tents, the whole shebang. He's pointing to both the profound deliverance from enemies and the severe internal discipline they lived through. These aren't distant myths. These are their lived experiences, permanently etched into their history.
Verse 7 really captures the essence of his whole argument here. But it was your own eyes that saw all these great things the Lord has done. Notice the powerful sensory language there. He's appealing directly to their firsthand visual memory. He is essentially saying, look, I'm not asking you to believe a fairy tale. I'm asking you to base your obedience on the undeniable reality of what your own eyes have actually witnessed. Memory is the absolute fuel for their future obedience. Because they remember the mighty hand of God in their past, they can have the strength and the faith to cross that Jordan River into their future.
Section 3. Egypt versus the Promised Land. This is a brilliant geographical contrast.
Moving into verses 8 through 12, Moses does something so clever. He transitions from historical memory to a fascinating geographical contrast to explain their new spiritual reality. Now, what's really interesting about this part of the text is the stark contrast between where they came from and where they are going. Think about it. In Egypt, agriculture relied on the Nile River. The text describes Egypt as a place where you planted your seed and irrigated it by foot. What does that actually mean, practically? Well, in Egypt, you didn't wait for rain. You dug irrigation ditches, you physically operated water wheels with your feet, you hauled heavy buckets. It was a predictable, mechanical, and entirely human endeavor. It relied entirely on your own physical sweat and exertion. In contrast, Moses describes the Promised Land as a land of mountains and valleys that drinks rain from heaven. It doesn't have a massive overflowing river like the Nile to just endlessly pump from. It is completely 100% dependent on seasonal rainfall. So why is Moses pointing this out in such detail? Because moving from Egypt to Canaan isn't just a change in a zip code, it's a profound shift in spiritual reliance. In Egypt, you look down at your feet at your own labor to survive. In the Promised Land, you have to look up to the heavens. You must rely on God to open the skies and provide the rain. It's a land that requires constant, active faith.
Section 4. Obedience, Rain, and Harvest. Let's look at the mechanics of this new covenant.
Because this new land is completely dependent on rain from heaven, Moses naturally moves into verses 13 through 17 to explain the core mechanics of the covenant they're entering. He explains exactly how the rain works in this new spiritual economy. The text outlines a very direct, literal cause and effect relationship. If they love God and serve Him with all their heart and soul, the text says God will send the rain in its season. The Hebrew specifically mentions the early rain, the yoreh, which falls in the autumn to soften the earth for planting, and the late rain, the malkush, which falls in the spring to plump up the grain right before harvest. Both are absolutely critical. This obedience results in abundant agricultural wealth, gathering grain, new wine and oil, the ancient staples of life, and providing grass in the fields for their livestock. The people will eat and be fully satisfied. But then we hit verse 16. This is the severe warning against idolatry. If their hearts are enticed to turn away, to worship other gods and bow down to them, the consequence is immediate and devastating. God's anger will burn against them, and He will literally shut the heavens. There will be no rain, the ground will yield no produce, and they will quickly perish from this good land. Their physical, agricultural survival in this new geography is directly and inextricably tied to their spiritual faithfulness.
Knowing the stakes are literally life and death, Moses gives them 4 highly practical, physical steps in verses 18 through 21 to ensure they never forget this covenant. And this brilliantly illustrates how faith translates to action. First, internalize it. Fix these words in your hearts and minds. Second, make it physical. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Third, verbalize it continually. Teach them to your children when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. It must be a constant conversation. And fourth, mark your territory. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. Why the doorframes and gates? Well, in the ancient Near East, the gates of a city and the doors of a house were the boundaries. They were places of judgment, commerce, and identity. By writing the commands there, Moses is creating an immersive, 24/7 educational environment. Everywhere an Israelite looks, their hands, their doors, their daily conversations, they're constantly reminded of who they are and who they serve.
Section 5. The Blessing and the Curse. Let's look at the ultimate choice.
This incredible buildup leads us right to the absolute climax of the chapter, found in verses 22 through 32. So what is the ultimate choice facing Israel as they stand on the edge of this new land? Think about it. They have the history, they understand the perilous new geography, they know the covenant rules. Now Moses distills it all down to a single, breathtaking ultimatum.
Moses declares in verse 26, "See, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse." The Hebrew words here are braka, blessing, and kalala, curse. Notice the stark, binary nature of this ultimatum. He doesn't say, "I'm setting before you a spectrum of options or a variety of lifestyle choices, depending on your personal preference." No way. It is blessing or it is curse. The blessing will come if they obey the commands of the Lord their God. The curse will come if they disobey those commands and turn from the way to follow other gods they haven't known. There is absolutely no middle ground in this text. It's a clear, sharp fork in the road.
Moses even physically maps the spiritual choice onto the geography of the land they're about to enter. In verses 29 and 30, he tells them that when they cross the Jordan, they are to hold a massive national ceremony. At Mount Gerizim, the blessings for obedience will be proclaimed. Across from it, at Mount Ebal, the curses for disobedience will be pronounced. And he gives them exact, specific coordinates for these mountains too. By tying the blessing and curse to these 2 prominent mountains, Moses is ensuring that every single time they look at the landscape of their new home, they are visually reminded of the profound choice they made. The very mountains themselves will stand as silent, towering witnesses to their covenant with God.
Section 6. Practical Lessons and our final recap. Let's move to our final section and see how this builds into real, practical takeaways for us today. We've covered a lot of ancient ground, but the simple, literal meaning, the Peshat, offers incredibly relevant lessons for our own lives. Let's recap the core ideas we've uncovered. First, remembering past deliverances fuels our present faithfulness. Just as the Israelites were commanded to explicitly remember the Red Sea and Egypt, recalling what God has done in our own past gives us the courage to face our own metaphorical Jordan rivers today. Memory is a tool for strength. Second, we have to acknowledge our absolute dependence on God. We aren't living in Egypt, where we can just rely entirely on our own mechanical labor and cleverness. We live in a reality that requires the rain from heaven, grace, provision, and divine help that we just can't manufacture ourselves. We have to look up, not just down at our feet. And third, passing teachings down to the next generation, that isn't an accident. It requires highly intentional, daily action. It's about talking about these truths when we sit down at dinner, when we travel, when we lie down at night, and when we rise in the morning. It has to be a fully integrated part of normal, everyday life.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to reflect on in your own life, based on the vivid imagery of this chapter. Are you relying entirely on your own irrigation by foot, endlessly striving purely by your own physical strength and mechanical effort, or are you ready to look up and trust in the rain from heaven? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.